Buckle up, camp pros, and get ready to launch into the future of summer camp with Camp Ahead. Camp Ahead helps camp pros think about the future so they're not caught off guard. Climate mitigation, heat, gender, war, demographics, economics, artificial intelligence. Are we ready as an industry? Camp Ahead, exploring the futurology of the summer camp industry. You can find our contact information and the many show notes from each episode at gocamp.pro/campahead.
Is creating your camp schedule a headache? Does it limit the experience of campers or staff? Campify is the software that does the heavy lifting for you, taking care of group, elective, and specialist scheduling based on your custom scheduling rules. Interested in learning more? Visit campify.io/campahead to schedule a demo or create a free trial today.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Camp Ahead, a podcast where we explore the future of camping. My name is KJ Williams. I am the camp director and chief program officer at Phantom Lake YMCA Camp in Mugwanago, Wisconsin.
Hey there, I'm Jess Elfring Roberts. I'm the executive director of Episcopal Camps and Conference Centers, and our offices are in Chicago.
And my name is Joe Richards. I'm the executive director of Pierce Williams Summer Camp and Retreat Facility, which is located in Iona, Ontario, just about halfway between Detroit and Toronto, and is part of the United Church of Canada's camping network of 50 plus camps across the country.
What are we doing today? What's going on in our Camp Ahead world?
I think today we talking about early warning signals and strategic flexibility at the end of the last podcast. And then just before we started recording, we were talking about what Jane called in the book, Imaginable Signals of Change. And so a signal of change is this idea when you're reading something and it makes you go, I should really think about that and how it applies to my facility or my position. Is that how you understand? How would you guys understand signals of change?
Yeah, I think about it as some like a blip on the radar, or like something that makes you pause and wonder. Or I was saying earlier, like it's kind of like a puzzle piece that it by itself, it doesn't seem significant, but when it's combined with other ones, you start to see like a larger trend, or you see something that might impact your camp or your organization.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I think it's the same exact concept. The same way I view a signal, like a stop sign or a yield sign, maybe more like a yield sign, right? Something is coming up where I need to figure it out, but I'm not quite at the full stop sign yet, or the light's not completely red yet. And so that's how I'm kind of viewing the signals of change.
Yeah, I view it as those things as well. It's the key that I would say, and excuse my cough. Right now, my board and I are working through some of these things every month at our board meeting, because my board wants to know about this stuff. Years ago, I actually started a database of what I would consider signals of change. And so some of the things on it, I've just brought them up. Mycelium furniture. So furniture material, which is formed from the vegetative part of fungus to be used for like lampshades and things. I don't know where it fits, but just to know that it exists is somewhere in the box of puzzle pieces that I can shake and bring together. I also have, what if public housing were for everyone, right? What if that's an article that Vox put out in 2024? Drought and wildfire concerns impact BC summer events. So like festivals and whatnot in British Columbia canceled events due to wildfires. Say goodbye to solar panels, 15,000 kilowatts of free electricity from this unique, quiet home wind turbines. So there's a whole thing about wind turbine design. Now, the latest one are vibrating wind turbines, not even turning wind turbines, which is, I have a whole database stored in a Notion page just on things that speak to me. And I think that's the key to a signal of change, is that it has to sort of pique your own curiosity to understand how it's connected.
I think you said something you always say really fascinating things. There's something that you said that I want to sort of amplify. And you said being aware. I think one of the most important things when you are doing future scenario planning or when you're trying to see if there is a signal of change is a self-awareness. Because if you are not aware of these little things, you'll miss them. And then all of a sudden, you'll be right at one of those key factors just jumping in front of you. But if you have a sense of an awareness, like I know about this furniture over here, or I know about the land next to me, the owner's talking about selling it, just in a side conversation. But if I'm not aware and I'm not paying attention, I could miss these things. And then when an opportunity or something happens, it'll be right in front of my face. And am I prepared for it? Because if I'm not aware, I might not be.
And I do think Joe brings this up almost every time we meet, is like that global awareness too is
Mhm.
so vital, especially in the world we're living in the political world we're living in, like an understanding of the world around us and not just the world we've created on our campgrounds.
Yeah, and
Mm.
I think like as I look through some of the other database stuff, like the New York Times had an article called "Will We Have to Pump the Great Lakes to California to Feed the Nation?" Right? That really impacts me because Lake Erie is 4 kilometers away, 2.2 miles, just to the south of me. The UN had a summit on the future. There's a climate map that ProPublica put out that showed how the US transforms with heat and water. And also things like setting intentions for the new year, how to support children in positive conversation. Like I think the idea of being aware is this superpower in leadership and in being a member of society today is curiosity is the superpower.
Mm.
Just being insatiably curious about the world around us. And this weekend I was sick and sitting in front of a TV and just sort of trying to veg out, and came across some video on YouTube that showed like an artist roll, which I had not, like a knife. If you know what a knife roll is or a tool roll, like it's just a duck canvas roll. And there's a
Mhm.
really nice artist roll. And I was like, oh, I could, I could sew that like as someone. And then I was like, oh, and I have, and this was in the back of my mind, because this is what happens with signals of change is you put it somewhere in the back of your mind. It's like a filing cabinet that is stuff's just back there boiling. And I was like, oh, I have these old, bought at auction. I have these old Canada Post canvas sacks that they use as mail bags that somehow came to my possession through auction. I was like, oh, I could use that as fabric to create my own roll.
Artist role. Yeah.
Yeah, artist roll or tool roll or whatever I want. But like showing the Canada Post logo on it, I was like, that would be the coolest thing in the world. And that's how I think about signals of change is you want to pay attention. So if you're a young camp professional, you want to pay attention to more than just your level of things. Because KJ, you often talk about your level, but like in your world, I assume you dream of reaching another level as well.
Totally.
And so what kind of things might you do? And this might be a fresh question to you. What kind of things might you see yourself paying more attention to as you plan on make plans for the future?
Yeah, I think the biggest one is the financial strategy and financial stability. That's going to be my next step in my career, is having more impact on the budget and the finances. And now is the time that I'm learning about that, right? Or the understanding of maybe more systemic issues or board related issues or facilities, those areas that either are not in my job description currently, or someone else is managing that might be on the same level as me, but I'm not our facilities director. I don't necessarily pay attention to that, but it's definitely something that's going to change and aligns with these systems of change that we're talking about.
Mm. Yeah, I was thinking about kind of KJ folks, because you're the director, right, of the summer camp.
Yep.
And you've got a couple layers ahead above you, right? And I've been thinking a lot about folks that my organization that I work for supports. We support executive directors, we support program directors, camp directors, and a lot of folks are in the process of maybe going to a different center, moving and wanting to move up, let's say. So let's say you're a program director and you've been working somewhere for maybe 5 years and you're ready for the next challenge or the next you've outgrown where you're at. And when you go in and you're thinking about, you've got interviews going up and you're talking about working somewhere new, how do you think about the things that you're unaware that you might need to plan for? So, like you're saying, like finances, like what happens when you've been living at a place and then you leave that place and you don't have any money saved up to buy a house or to pay the deposit on a rental because
Right.
you've been living somewhere? And how do you, and sometimes like the awareness of, I didn't even think about that.
Right.
And what does that look like? And how do I, if I'm going into a new job, how do I pause and think like, well, what could that look like? Could I work that into my contract that maybe like $100 a month goes into a fund that when I leave, I can to help with a down payment or something like that. But there's these things that we're not fully aware of because maybe it's not that we've been blinded to them, but we're not even conscious that they're an option. And how do we help people in those negotiations? But I think a lot of this can help you kind of think through those kind of things. Or if you have a thought partner who can think through those things with you, because a lot of folks have a lot of great training. And then how do we lift those people up to the next level and then give them the support and the resources that they need to thrive once they move forward?
Totally. I always think about how every camp is essentially doing the same thing. We all share the same values, the same missions for the most part, right? We're all singing the same songs, but they're all so uniquely different. And so when I think about making these moves or moving elsewhere or transitioning to another position, I know how this camp runs back and forth, right? That I'm at, but it's going to be drastically different even though we're doing the same thing somewhere else.
Yep.
But these signals of change, I would say for the most part are going to be pretty similar across the board in all of our camps, right? And that's what it comes back to.
And do you think it's different because of the key factors that align with where that specific camp is, right?
Totally.
And personalities and all of those
Sure.
things, but I think the key factors, because they can change so drastically depending on where you are in the world.
Just regionally, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that the idea is, and this is the same idea I have with denominational camping, is that 95% of what we do is the same,
Mm-hmm.
right? So when you
Yeah.
think about it from a religious context, right, whether you're an Episcopalian camp, United Church of Canada camp, 95% of what we do to run a camp and retreat facility is the same stuff. That other 5% is what I think of as theology in the religious sense. In camping, I think the same thing. 90% of everything we do is the same stuff, and 10% has to do with personality and location. And I think that when we're looking ahead to signals of change, if you, even if you're in Wisconsin right now, but you have a box, a database, something with a whole bunch of signals of change that you've collected, and I recommend to people to start collecting these in a database of some nature, be it an Excel spreadsheet, be it a Notion database, just somewhere where you can reference it and go, and it doesn't even have to make sense. And this is the benefit of signals of change. It's not, well, I think about that. It's the benefit, but also could be the downfall for, I want to see younger people. I catch myself there because I understand that I'm an old white guy, but like for people who were brought up in the education system very differently than me, where everything had to have a purpose, everything had to be done correctly. All we're doing is throwing stuff at the wall and leaving it there. It's like you have a giant corkboard or whiteboard on the wall and you're just drawing in things. You have no idea how it connects. That in the end is going to be beneficial no matter what your position is right now. Whether you're in your late 20s as a camp program person, whether you're in your mid 30s as a young camp director, you're just gathering information to try and make your place the best possible, but also to see how camp fits into the world. And it's an ongoing process, or process as some Americans say, to try and help us connect the dots in our minds as we go through and as the world changes around us. And right now, from your context as Americans, it's changing dramatically with no apparent reason nor set plan, and that's even more confusing as we go through, but can help you meet needs as they come up. Summer camp directors, listen up. What if I told you there was a magical tool that could transform your camp scheduling chaos into a breeze? Introducing Campify, a camp scheduling platform making scheduling as fun as camp itself. Before you hit skip, hear us out. Campify isn't just another app, it's your new secret weapon to conquer scheduling chaos. Camps across North America wish they tried it sooner, and none would ever go back to scheduling the old-fashioned way. Every camp is unique, and it has its own special quirks. Campify gets that, and it works and thinks for you. It builds schedules based on rules that you set, and Campify offers much more than group scheduling. Campify's elective module gives campers personalized schedules. Say goodbye to last-minute changes causing scrambling and confusion. Campify's staff mobile app updates schedules in real time. Your time is valuable. Let Campify save you hours and make the scheduling effortless. Bring your camp into the future and discover the smarter way to schedule. Visit campify.io/campahead to schedule a demo. Create a free trial and claim 10% off your first year's license.
So can I ask a question to both of you as folks that have been in this industry much longer than I have?
Yeah.
I say
You
much
may.
longer than I have, excuse me. How do you look at these warning signs, these warning signals, these signals of change, and not get so overwhelmed?
You are assuming that they're warning signs. I'm assuming they're opportunities.
Okay.
Right? And so you have to sort of weigh out both of those things. Everything I've said is an opportunity to someone,
Sure.
right? Some of the other things that are going on that I have not said is a warning sign, but also an opportunity to do things differently. I think generally I look at the world through a lens of optimism, so it's easier for me to not see the warning signs as the warning signs. I'm not sure what you think, Jess. I'm going to look up a quote as Jess shares.
So, I mean, to be honest, I think that there have been every generation, and has had warning signs, different warning signs. And I think that camp is so vital to the human experience because humans crave community.
Yes.
We thrive in community. We need community. And camp can often be the first place that people experience diversity because in your life, you have a protected bubble. And that, like, whatever that is, you choose the people that you're friends with, you choose X, Y, and Z. And in camp, you're exposed to a multitude of different factors. And it is such a gift that we're able to have it. And you have people who've been trained to help when there are hard conversations to have. Like if I say something to somebody and I didn't realize that I hurt their feelings, I have a way to reconcile with them. And I have an adult who's going to help me navigate that. And the only other place that is similar to that is college if you live in the dorms. Sure. That you're really exposed and you build this community with. And camp has this way of creating core memories with people that nobody else will have that experience except for the people in your cabin, right? For the rest of time, whatever that happened in that cabin that summer, that is like your core memory with those people. And I think that I don't get overwhelmed or thinking about all of these things because I know that there are people who camp has changed their life or have seen it change someone else's life and want to keep that going. And the leadership skills, the ability to try something and fail and be picked back up and try again. We see people thriving and taking the things they learn there, taking it into their job, taking it into their career, taking it into parenting or grandparenting. There's so many things that people learn and take from this world that I think it will always continue, but we need to be able to change with the times and tweak and And I think it's always like looking at these key factors and how do we support if all of this stuff is going on, how do we, when we create these worlds, these safe places to lead people, how do we take those key factors and make sure that we are giving the best supports to the campers, to the staff, participants, parents that we can.
Mhm.
And I feel like we have to.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say calling. I'm not going to say it, but I feel like there are people who are just like, this is where I'm supposed to be.
Right.
And I want to lead up that next generation, or I want to help somebody who maybe had a terrible experience at camp at one point, build that bridge together.
I think you're right. Like I do when I hear signals, I think of the warning signals, and warning is a scary word, right? Wah, 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 warning. We tend to always mention climate in these conversations when we're recording. And that seems like something that is so far out of our control, right?
Yeah.
And this changing climate. It's, I think, those bigger systemic overarching issues that are going to affect camp and going to affect everyone. That is where I feel overwhelmed, right?
Yeah.
We can adapt and change programming. I love doing that. We can adapt and change for the needs of our campers that we're serving and our staff that we're serving. But these big overarching things are where the overwhelmingness hits me pretty heavily.
I think that's valid. I have a distinct memory from the summer of 1991. Before you were born, I was a very young staff member, and it was just before the start of the first Gulf War, and there was a lot of talk about nuclear weapons being used.
Mhm.
And it felt like, to me, as a, I don't know, 17, 18-year-old, I was just like, what is the world coming to? Like, where are we going, and how do we get through this? And in the end, it unbeknownst to me, it sort of formed into this idea that is my personal mantra, which is affect positive change where one can.
Mm.
Right? So in your position at your camp, you might not have the ability to change everything, but you have the ability to change what you can.
Sure.
I often think about Penn and Teller are magicians from Las Vegas. Raymond Teller is Teller's first name. And his quote that I found a couple of years ago is, except in extreme circumstances, happiness is mostly internal. One sets a horizon line in one's life and decides that everything above it is joy and everything below it is grief. My horizon line is well placed to make sure that most of my landscape is happy. And then also around just after that, I found this idea of pronoia versus paranoia, because I think what you're getting into, KJ, is this idea of paranoia, right?
Sure.
That climate can make you feel paranoid about everything. And pronoia is the antidote for paranoia. This is the quote. It's the understanding that the universe is fundamentally friendly. It's a mode of training your senses and intellect so that you're able to perceive the fact that life always gives you exactly what you need, exactly when you need it. And that's by Rob Brenzy. Climate comes up because climate is easy, and climate is easy to discuss. But once again, climate has been around for as long as I've been alive. Rachel Carson wrote Silent Spring before I was born in 1973. And Silent Spring, if you haven't read the book, is the beginning of the environmental movement in many people's understanding of it. I think that when we as camp people think through signals of change, we want to think through only how, when you see a signal, it doesn't need to make sense. And this is the hard part for lots of people, because their whole life is about, how does this apply to me now?
Mm.
Right? And a signal of change might mean nothing to you ever. Like mycelium grown lampshades, like mushroom lampshades, might never come to anything. But just the fact that they exist in the world is amazing. Like, in my mind, I'm like, oh, that's a renewable, buildable. I then do you ever go down rabbit holes where you see something, you're like, oh,
Every day.
let's go down the mycelium rabbit hole. They're building furniture out of it, and that furniture is fully compostable. Right? How long it would be useful is a wholly other question. But like, it's this idea of, when we see a signal of change for summer camps, And that this is the thing. I don't think that it's just for camps or just, I think we're seeing signals of change, how they apply to what we have our passion in. Because somebody in education could see the same signal we see about, I don't know, about one of the things that I had mentioned, right? And it would apply to them slightly differently,
Mm-hmm.
right? What if public housing were for all? Like, what if everybody just got a house, right, as part of your existence in your country? That would be, that would change so many things. One of them was that with a cure for cancer, cancer camps have to close, or HIV camps actually closed last summer because there weren't enough campers to attend who had parents with HIV because HIV has been controlled, right? These are all things that that signal might mean nothing to me as a camp in southwestern Ontario, but what it does, it signals, okay, well, what things do I need to pay attention to, right? Like, is it that HIV? No. Is it that technology and medication can change things? Right. So now people are going to, let's say that a different medication makes people live longer who are retired and have the income to do program, right? Like do seniors programming. So then are we just, is summer camp really just a kids event? Is summer camp a year round event with all ages? All of these things start to come into play.
I want to push back on something, Joe, that you said, because I have ADHD and my brain will focus on something for a very long time. And I think it's about climate. And KJ, I don't think you're paranoid about it. And I think that it is something that is so far out of our control.
Right.
And I think that there are ways in which we can say, okay, if this is something like that we know is changing, climate is changing, what are the things that we can do to educate and form our campers about?
Mm-hmm.
You know, after World War II, we were doing victory gardens. So people in urban areas were learning how to farm in a very small amount and learning how to grow their own food. And what are the ways in which we can teach people what makes sense to our location? Because every camp is in a different place. But I think there are little things that you have to look at, like, because what are the key factors that change? Because if your camp is on the Gulf Coast and you've got sand, that's going to be different. Your climate discussion or formation, whatever you want to call it, will look totally different versus, someone in Juneau, Alaska doing camp, or in Portland, because sometimes food grows differently in other places. But I just want to say, like, I don't think you're being paranoid, and I don't think that Joe was saying that, but it's just cycling in my head of that it is an important thing and we do care about it. And it's not the only key factor that is changing things in our world.
Right.
I'll get off the box now.
I think the box is fine, and I will take that. I love the idea that you didn't say out loud. Camp for me has always been about subversive education.
Mm.
What is subversive education?
Teaching kids how to garden at camp, right?
Mm-hmm.
Teaching them life skills that that I might have experienced in the 1970s as a young child that we no longer exist.
Yep.
And that can be, I just wrote down a few, that can be gardening and food. It can also be like social skills, like kindness and acceptance, right? I think this is what camp does best. Because there's times where I've changed something in the program. They're like, well, how are you going to tell parents you've changed that? And I was like, I'm not. Like there's zero reason for me to tell parents. There's nothing dramatically different. But I think this idea that I think most camps are trying to create a better world and better people to go out into the world. And I think when we look at these signals of change, in my mind, it's always about how will camp still be relevant in 10, 15, 20, 30 years?
Totally.
I love that the idea of camp with soft skills, that you're learning these soft skills, because I teach improv at Second City, and there are so many skills that you learn the same in improv that you learn in camp, which is a wild thing, but they're these skills that we're not teaching. You're right, that aren't being taught in school. And these are skills that you need for life, not just to get a grade in class. And there are fewer and fewer opportunities for those kind of skills to be learned and practiced in education. And so it's a really interesting thing to think about. If that is happening, how do we promote it in the camp world? That would be an interesting scenario.
Sure.
Well, the ACA has a giant grant right now for what?
Character.
For character. And I think
Yep.
a lot of this is, and I only know that because my friend Jim Kane sent me a bunch of stuff, and he's already written a book about it. I think a lot of that is, I always look at, I'm trying to send people out into the world as better people,
Mm-hmm.
right? So campers at camp, I just want them to leave as better people. And staff, I want them to leave as better people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when we look at signals of change, it's often intentionally or unintentionally, I look at these signals and how it's going to affect the generations of people that I'm sending out into the world, right? So, or have sent out into the world, and will they be able to adapt
Mm.
and help? And I think there's so many things that don't change for camp. I wrote something called the Camp Counselors Manifesto, which is right here behind me on the wall, which is in hundreds of camps across the world have used it, and it just is a timeless piece, unintentionally on my part, or intentionally, I don't know, because I wrote it almost 25 years ago, and it's just the same. It's just the same things apply today.
Mm-hmm.
No matter what changes we've gone through, the same things apply today. When we look at signals of change, there's going to be a base of things that are always the same about camp. And then there's going to be the things that we need to adapt to make camp better, to make our campers better and our staff better as they go out into the world. So when I look at signals of change, I think I'm looking at it from so many different angles because I want camp to be a relevant application of societal development. Those are big words.
Mm.
But like, I want to normalize going to camp as something that everybody should do and must
Mm-hmm.
do to be part of this great experiment we call society.
And the thing that I never really knew as a kid, and I never went to camp, to like a real sleepover camp as a kid. I never really knew that there's scholarship money out there.
Mm.
You kind of know it once you're like, I feel like every camp that I've ever worked at or partnered with has said we will never turn away a camper because of funds. Even if that camp is in the red, they will take a camper. And I think I just I think about that often. I think about people who like want the camp experience but feel like they can't have it because of that. And I don't know, how do we tell that story? That you can. And also, I also know that there are people who are like, absolutely not. Camp is not for me.
Mhm.
Never, ever, ever. I don't know, but those two things kind of stuck out to me. And I want people to know like that if you want your kid to go to camp or you want to go to camp, we can find a way. And I feel like any camp would say that. I guess I can't put every camp in the same box, but I want to.
Yeah. Ideally, any camp would say that, right?
Any final thoughts for this episode?
What would you all say are some of the maybe biggest signals of change or most prominent signals of change to keep an eye out for, whether it be positive or negative, going into this new year?
As a Canadian, looking from a country that loves itself and most everything we do, and seeing how we're being portrayed by an American system, your current government, I think one of the signals of change for me is and one of the signals of change that Canadians are getting on board of, whether you know it or not, people are posting whole grocery hauls where they've bought no product of the United States, nothing. And it is, I said before we started recording that there is a joke in Canada that if you can control Quebec, you can have it. But the reality is what this has done is this has made Quebecers proud to be Canadian.
Mm.
And so that's a signal of change to me to pay attention to our own. My cook has also reached out to say, well, can we change suppliers if we need to for products? Because be it tariffs, be it taxes, be it whatever, I'm like, you can do whatever you want to save money. Like that's only applicable. But I think for me, it's a big signal of change is that people who we consider friends, the camping community in the United States, we're not feeling very friendly with, we don't feel, Canada as a country doesn't feel like we're a friend anymore. We feel like, and so that signal of change is, to me, is how we treat people and how the reaction it can have that is beyond what we do, right?
Something that I've been thinking about is who's telling your story. Something that I have noticed in our organization. So our organization has consultants that help camp and conference and retreat centers find a new leader. And I watched 3 of these centers hire outside groups that had never really worked with camp and conference people. And I watched them really struggle and fail at trying to find a new person. And it made me think, like, how are we telling the story about how we help do that? How we help centers do that? And I think the stage of change is telling me that we need to do a better job of sharing the gifts that we have for helping centers find their next because we have a really, really talented group of people who do that. And so I've been thinking, like, how do we tell that story? And I'm thinking a lot about centers too, with this, like, how do you tell your story especially with what's going on in the United States? There are lots of folks that are scared. And how do you say, like, this camp could be a place where your camper could be free to be themselves or be authentic or be in a place where they're loved, celebrated, and affirmed for X, Y, and Z. And how do you get that message out there? And you should start thinking about that. If you haven't yet, you should start thinking about that now. And what does that look like? How are you telling that story to bring people in and give them a place where they can be a camper or a staff member?
Yeah, that was almost my same thought too, Jess, was in a world that in the United States, excuse me, that from a systemic level and government level is saying maybe not DEI. I'm like, whoa, hold on, rewind, and how vital that is to the camp experience of bringing kids in, of staff in, of people in that are their whole and complete authentic self, getting space for that. And also what we were just talking about, like learning those life skills and those social emotional skills, and you get those things from a diverse group of people. That's one of my signals that I'm looking for right now, is how do we adapt programming to maybe meet these standards that the government is now setting, but also still align with our missions and our values to create a space for all people. Thank you all for joining us for episode 5 of the Camp Ahead podcast. We are going to be meeting next time to talk about creating actionable plans for and contingency strategies going forward, and how that looks in the camping and conference world. Jess and Joe, for now, where can everybody find you? Where can they reach out for questions?
You can find me in my basement, but I'm working, so please don't. Or you can find me on the internets. Episcopal CCC is our organization's Instagram. You can find out all sorts of information at ccc.org, and you can email me at jess@episcopalccc.org.
You can find me at campisbetter.com. That's everything about Pierce Williams. You can also reach me on my cell phone if you really want to, 519-636-4285. I love the look on your two faces right there.
I love it. I love it so much.
I've put this out on Camp Hacker. Nobody has ever called me.
I'm going to call you now.
Yeah.
Well, feel free. And before we go, I also want to recognize that if you're not watching the video feed, that KJ is wearing a Buc-ee's hat, and it's super awesome.
I love Buc-ee's.
Yeah.
It's an
I stopped at
experience.
2 Buc-ee's on the way home from ECCC.
Nice.
I went for my first time and I was very overwhelmed, but it was a great trip.
Was it a transformational experience for you?
It really was. I got a good picture with Bucky himself.
Oh my gosh.
And you can find me at phantomlakeymca.org. Same thing on all of the socials. And my email is kj@phantomlakeymca.org. Thank you all for joining us, and we will see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to Camp Ahead, exploring the futurology of the summer camp industry. Don't forget to check out our contact information and show notes at gocamp.pro/campahead. Camp Ahead is part of the Go Camp Pro podcast network. Find a podcast for camp pros of every age and stage at gocamp.pro/podcast. Hey Camp Pros, we love that our industry is built on sharing. In order to foster that spirit, we ask that whenever you get something great from a conference session, one of these podcasts, from the Camp Pros group on Facebook, wherever else, that you give credit where credit is due. That way, people can feel comfortable about sharing their best practices and continue to make all of our camps better. Thanks so much.